Hello. Today's poem we're considering is Poem. Yes, you heard right. Poem by Simon Armitage. Before we start, if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, if you could, it would be greatly appreciated. I have the poem here, so let's start. And if it snowed and snow covered the drive, he took a spade and tossed it to one side, and always tucked his daughter up at night and slippered her the one time that she lied. And every week he tipped up half his wage, and what he didn't spend each week he saved, and praised his wife for every meal she made, and once, for laughing, punched her in the face. And for his mum he hired a private nurse, and every Sunday taxed her to church, and he blubbed when she went from bad to worse, and twice he lifted 10 quid from her purse. Here's how they rated him when they looked back. Sometimes he did this, sometimes he did that. For those who are familiar with Simon Armitage's poems, we are definitely within his territory and range. It's a complex poem with plenty to explore and to discuss. So let's start unpacking it. In Poem, Simon Armitage presents an obituary and eulogy of sorts for an anonymous man. He asks us to consider our own lives and evaluate the good and bad we do. He asks us to consider the future and how we will be judged and rated by others. Employing the past tense, the speaker describes the life of an unnamed man, and every man representing us. Throughout the poem, the speaker presents a series of contradictions. He lists the man's good and bad sides. The poem has an interesting start, beginning with, "And if it snowed." This immediately centres the reader in media res, in a conversation that has already started about the man. In stanza 1, we are told that he would go out with a spade and clear the driveway of snow. He was an attentive father, tucking his daughter up in bed every night. But it seems he's very harsh because he beats her the one time that she lied. And seems harsh and unsettling that he would beat her at all. Coming after a list of attributes, it is intended to shock us. In stanza 2, he seems to be a good husband, sensibly saving and giving half his wages to the family rather than spending it on himself. He seems to appreciate his wife, praising every meal she cooks for the family. But we are told he had a violent, angry side, and that he punched his wife for simply laughing, presumably at him. And this is a pattern of exposition that continues throughout the poem. In stanza 3, the man is presented as a caring son, paying for a private nurse to take care of his mother and paying for a taxi to take her to church every Sunday. He is sensitive. He blubbers when her condition worsens. Yet we are told he stole money from her purse. So the speaker presents a fairly decent man, a loving father, husband and son. But there are unpleasant aspects to his personality. The poet uses plain, stark language, which makes the revelation of the unpleasant side powerful. Punched her in the face. He lifted 10 quid from her purse. Interestingly, Armitage presents a thumbnail sketch, a vignette, of the man without making value judgments. He presents his good and bad sides. The speaker presents things as factual and objective. Using third-person voice creates a sense of detachment when describing the man, inviting us to take an objective view of him. The poem's title, Poem, adds to this stark presentation, mirroring the sentiments presented in the poem's final lines. Sometimes he did this, sometimes he did that. He was what he was in the same way that this poem is what it is. The title contains no clue to the poem's meaning and allows the reader the distance and freedom to form their judgment of the man. The poet allows the reader to fill in the gaps and form their impressions of the person. We may infer he is involved in physical work rather than a professional job. Wage, not salary, suggests this. Also, he appears a man of action, clearing the snow, hiring a nurse, arranging a taxi. All commendable, but he uses his physicality in the form of violence to solve the complexity of human relationships. Slippering his child, punching his wife. Armitage's approach uses show, not tell, inviting the reader to interpret the poem and form their conclusions. This is typical of other poems he has written, including About His Person and Hitcher. The poet presents the man's life, emphasising in the first 3 lines of each stanza his good side, and we respect and admire him. But Armitage, in the final line of each stanza, presents his unpleasant side, made forceful by being placed at the end of the line. Yet, as we start to dislike this man, at the start of the next stanza, the poet describes his positive side. By doing this, Armitage challenges us to reflect on how we judge others. How do we decide if they are good or bad people? And do we simplistically label them good or bad, or weigh the positives against their negatives? Or not weigh them against each, but rather accept these as a whole and accept these are what made the man? Armitage also tilts the scale in presenting in 3 lines the admirable side and devoting 1 line to the bad. By doing this, he asks us to consider whether, when appraising him, we focus more on his darker side and place more weight on his unpleasant actions, rather than recognising he did good things too. Like any fine poet, Armitage does not provide answers or neat solutions, and leaves us to reflect on how we respond to the man. The poet highlights this theme in the final couplet, separate from the other stanzas for added emphasis and stressing its importance. Here's how they rated him when they looked back. Sometimes he did this, sometimes he did that. Armitage asks us to rate him. Are we prepared to be as non-judgmental as the they he mentions? The they is deliberately ambiguous. There is a suggestion that the man has died, and This poem is an obituary of sorts. I imagine that this is his funeral and the they are his friends and family. This ambiguity gives Armitage freedom to explore universal themes of how we appraise and rate people, and also to consider what others may say of us one day when we pass away. Armitage may also be cautioning us not to be too judgmental and to acknowledge we are all imperfect, a mixture of good and bad, light and shade. Perhaps Armitage is also making comment on obituaries in general. Perhaps he is asking us to be more honest in our obituaries, where we often concentrate on the positive or negative sides and create simplistic representations without considering the complications and complexities of what made that person. The poem is perhaps an antidote to this. Perhaps the poem acknowledges that it is difficult to summarise or rate a person's life because we are, like life, complicated. The poem's structure comprises 14 lines, and its division into quatrains and a separate rhyming couplet might be described as a sonnet. Using a formal structure lends gravitas and indicates the important themes explored. Armitage places his own spin on the form, departing from the typical Shakespearean sonnet, placing the odd and even rhyme words uncomfortably close together. Drive, night, side and lied, and the use of long vowel sounds and the assonance produced in the first 4 lines give an impression of a rhyming pattern A. Equally with nurse, church, worse and purse, creating a disconcerting feeling that there is something slightly off kilter, like the man's behaviour, and that the sonnet is imperfect, just like the man it describes. And although the poem ends with a couplet, it avoids a neat resolution. The poem, like the man, is what it is. Simon Armitage has been Poet Laureate since 2019, and his poems appear on the English curriculum. For many years, working as a probation officer in the northwest of England, many of his poems examine states of mind and lived experiences in realistic settings. Thanks for watching this video, and I hope you found it interesting and helpful. If you did, please hit the like button. Please also don't forget to check out our other videos on writing and textual analysis. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, it would be greatly appreciated if you would. Until next time, from Carol and me, write well.